Hey friends, welcome to your mat today. I'm Val, and today we'll be going through a workshop style class on 6 poses that will be really helpful to enliven your legs. So if your legs are really tired after the end of your workday, or you just have tired legs in general from being on your feet all the time, this class will be a really great option for you. I'll be breaking down a handful of seated postures and forward bending poses. I'll be giving you a bunch of different options and variations on how you can approach these poses with more accessibility to your body and feel the benefits of these poses to their fullest. If you are someone who enjoys deepening and building your mind-body connection through the practices of yoga, mindfulness, and meditation, be sure to subscribe to my channel, give this video a like, and continue watching for more. Let's get started. So for today's class, we will need a variety of props, as you can see. Just so we have things available, I'm always a firm believer on having the props with you just in case you want them, especially if they're available to you, whether you're in a yoga studio or at home. Having props nearby is really nice. So you can kind of get what you need, take a moment, and find ways to make your poses more accessible to you, right? So a Mexican blanket will be one of the first things that we will need. It doesn't have to be a Mexican blanket. It could be a blanket of this sort. Something that can be folded up really nicely and evenly so it's not bumpy or rigid. A yoga strap will be really nice to have. And if you don't have a strap, you can always grab a sarong or a tie or a belt or something of that nature. So one of those. If you have couch pillows, these are something that we typically have in our house. So if you're at home doing this, couch pillows are nice. Not super thick ones, but 2 of the same kind or same height rather will be really nice to have. Blocks. I have these cork yoga blocks, but any kind of yoga block will work. And a bolster if you have. And if you don't have a bolster, you can always substitute a pillow off of your bed. As long as it's not really soft, you'll want something with a little bit of a firmness to it and about that size. There's different kinds of bolsters. Some people have round bolsters or like circular bolsters. Any kind of bolster will work for today. So let's get started. We're going to start with our first pose called Hero's Pose, or in Sanskrit, it's Virasana. Virasana or Hero's Pose is a pose that stretches the ankles, it stretches the shins, it stretches the thighs. It's a really a nice pose that you can substitute for like an easy seated pose or a pose that you can start in. So it's very grounding. And I will show you the pose and then we'll go through it with modifications and props. So it's where your knees are coming in towards each other. So you want your knees close towards each other. Your feet will come out about a little wider than hip width apart, trying to press into the tops of the feet evenly. The hips are facing forward. And you'll start to hinge and lean the hips back like you're going to sit down in between your heels, because essentially that's what you're going to do. As you sit down into your heels, some things that you can kind of just assist yourself with is one, if it's too much for the knees to be in this deep flexion, right away you can take a blanket. And a lot of this will be trial and error. So taking a blanket and putting it in between the knees is a really nice way to alleviate some of that compression and also some of that deeper flexion. So you can kind of soften off of that. As you come back to sit down, you might decide that that's a good height, or you need to make it a little bit higher. So you can do one of a few things. You can fold the blanket up evenly until you have your desired height. Yeah. Or you can take a pillow that's a little thicker than what the blanket would be. Also a little cushionier, if that's a word. And place that kind of behind your knees. So it's a lot of trial and error. You might like it. You might like the blanket better. Now you can kind of stack up to your needs. Having a pillow or a blanket or even a bolster will just bring more cushion to your seat as well. So you can take a bolster. And of course, with the bolster, you'll have to widen your knees a little. But just let your knees kind of draw in towards each other as your feet draw away from each other and come down. Okay. Something also is as you come down to your seat, we have extra flesh in our calves, right? So taking your thumbs to the backs of your knees and the calves and kind of just making space for the for behind the knee to soften into is a good way to give yourself an assist. Yeah. And as you come down, having your knees be slightly inward, you can use the palms of your hands to press into the upper thighs to help add a little length into the spine. This also initiates this opening across the chest. So opening across the chest, doing your best to lift up through the sternum while not overarching in the back, pulling the low belly in, reaching down through your seat and lifting up through your spine. Also, we'll try this with a block and I'll show you how you can kind of build to your needs as well. So a block in between the legs, kind of right between the feet. The knees draw in towards each other. And the block is there for us to sit on. Now, 2 blocks, just make it higher. So if you have a lot of difficulty in this pose, don't be discouraged. I think it's more important to find ways that poses can accommodate you rather than being discouraged by a pose and not trying it or just giving up on it. So finding the height that suits your body best, right? This brings a lot of lift into the hips, a lot more length through the tops of the legs. You can always adjust the knees a little wider also in any of these variations. You need to adjust them a little higher, do so. But there's a slight internal rotation of the upper of the hips as the feet come out. One more thing I'm going to point out is making sure that you don't spill the weight to the inside of your foot, right? Or the outside of your foot. It's more towards the whole top of the foot pressing down into the ground rather than caving in or caving out. This is Hero's Pose or Virasana. Take a few moments. You can pause this video and you can kind of feel around with all of your props, which one works best for you. And then give yourself 10 full breaths in through the nose and out through the nose in each pose. Notice how it feels. Notice how your legs feel after the pose. It's bringing in a lot of awareness to the tops of the legs. So they should feel like they're slowly waking up through these poses. We'll journey into our next pose now, which is Balasana or child's pose. A child's pose is a pose that you are pretty familiar with if you have a yoga practice. It is a resting pose and it's a very calming resting pose as it allows us to take a break from other postures or even if we're in a movement class. Child's pose is one of those poses that I always recommend to my students, if you need a break, come here. Come here. Come to child's pose. If you need to recapture your breath, or if you need to reset your mind and your intention, child's pose is a beautiful stopping point to quiet the noise of the mind and listen to the internal breath, listen to the internal dialogue, just kind of shifts everything from the external to the internal. So Malasana, child's pose, let's give it a go. Starting without any props, your knees come about mat width apart. So widening your knees, letting your big toes come to touch, and sinking your hips towards your heels. As you sink your hips towards your heels, keep an upright spine, maybe a little bit of movement here. Lots of intuitive movement can be added into these poses just to let them be more unique to you. Taking a few moments here until you come down, lowering your torso towards the mat and outstretching your arms in front of you. Give a little bend into the elbows and let the forehead gradually journey towards the earth. When you are ready to come out of a child's pose, bringing your hands under your shoulders, pressing into your hands to lift the torso up and find a tall spine is a very compassionate way to come out of it. It's a very intentional way to come out of it. So we'll start to break down this pose with some props. The tops of the ankles, they're getting a big stretch. You can take a blanket towards the back of your mat, so the tops of your ankles can rest on that. And you can fold that blanket up to the height that will fit in kind of the little nape of the ankle. All right, so you can build it up, and that'll bring out a lot of tension. So alleviating something that can really cause you to not focus into the purpose of this pose. So doing that, letting the big toes touch from here, the knees are still slightly wider than the hips, almost as wide as your mat, and sink the hips down towards your heels. Now, as the hips come towards your heels, that's where a little bit more pressure comes into the pose. So you might feel right away if the blanket suits your needs or if you need to adjust it at all. You can come down the same way. Letting the forehead come towards the mat is also something I see a big issue with this pose. Is as you come down, some people just don't have that space and that flexibility to release all the way down towards the ground. Now, when we work with this pose, we're working with gravity, so it might take some time, and that's okay. Build the ground up to you to support you, whether it's a pillow or whether it's a block. As you come down, the forehead can connect onto that prop. And right away, that lifts the ground up, it supports the head, and it gives more accessibility to surrender in this pose, right? To let the whole body melt down towards the ground in time. If a block was underneath the forehead, the beauty of the block is that there are multiple heights to it. So if you need that block higher, let the block come under the forehead at any height that suits you. You'll still want the hips back towards the heels. We're getting a nice big stretch through the spine into the inner groin as the legs are a little wider. This is really good to help open up the hips and bring more awareness to the pelvis. Adjusting that block to suit your body. letting those elbows bend to alleviate any tension in the shoulders, right? The shoulders get heavier and heavier. And another option is you can bring the hands back towards the feet for more of a fetal pose. Palm space up. And as you give yourself time in this pose, you'll gradually be able to allow the forehead to come towards the earth. With the legs wide, the torso can breathe in and out to and from the earth back towards the spine. And really fill the body with the fullest capacity of breath. The front, the back, the sides. So hands under the shoulders to help yourself out of the pose. Press the ground away. Find a tall spine. And we'll come off of any props. One last option is a bolster. Now, this is a more restorative style or even a yin style of this balasana or child's pose, is just placing that bolster in between your legs and resting down on it. Maybe one cheek comes down to the side. Getting a stretch into the neck. Good. So child's pose, again, is one of those poses that brings a sense of calm to your practice. It's a little break whenever you need it. And it's really important to allow this pose to do just that for you, to give you a break, to give you the space to come back to your breath, or just take a chill minute or 2 or 10. If you're looking for more of a stretch into the back body, the spine, the low back, just walking your knees in closer will give you a sensation in that area versus the knees wider gives you the sensation in the hips and the groin. So practice child's pose and take the next few moments, if you haven't gotten enough time already, to go through these different variations with child's pose, balasana, and see which one works best for you. Now, the beauty is whenever you come to the mat, whenever you come to your practice, if you have a few minutes before a class starts if you're in a studio, you can take whatever poses you need, but child's pose is one of those poses that you can kind of get onto your mat, get right into, and receive a lot of messages about how your body feels that day. So just allow 10 full breaths in this pose to see how the body's feeling. When you come out of the pose, how are your legs feeling? Do they feel a little bit more alive? Our next pose is Malasana, otherwise known as Garland pose. And this is a pose that we naturally have practiced for thousands of years. But as we've got more accustomed to sitting at desks or driving around and not doing as much walking or standing or physical activities, we've lost this connection to this pose and to be able to do it easily, right? A lot of cultures do practice this still, such as the Asian culture. When I went to Southeast Asia, a lot of the people there eat their food in malasana, right? They're in this kind of squat position and they eat their food. I was walking down the road and I would see people gathered out on the sidewalks with like a blanket and their food, and they're just sitting there eating and they're so comfortable and they're so happy. And I was so inspired. And this is a pose that if you are very tight in the hips, if you have sat for your job for years and years and years, it's not the most accessible, but we will work on making it as accessible for you as possible and growing it as you practice. So Malasana or Garland pose. For this pose, I'm going to break it down with the props first, and we'll work our way into more depth of it. So we'll start with 2 blocks. Now, have them at about the center of your mat on the highest setting and about 2 feet apart almost, or as far apart to support your bolster as possible. So if you have a round bolster or if you have more of a circular bolster, kind of adjust accordingly to your props underneath it, but you want your props to support it. I'm going to move these a tiny bit closer just so it's not too teetered one way or the other. So have your props support your bolster. We'll come to the top of the mat. As you come to the top of the mat, think of your bolster being the seat for you to settle your bum onto. Let your feet come out wider than hip width apart, a little wider than hip width apart. Gently dial your toes out as your heels draw in. The big toes are almost pointing to the corner edges of the mat. Inhale, reach your arms high. Exhale, bring your hands to your heart. Take an inhale, lift up through your sternum. And as you exhale, bend into your knees, sinking your hips back towards that seat. As you sink back, make sure your knees are not caving in, but they're opening out into your squat. If you stop right here, that is okay. This is where you'll be. This is where you'll be working on. You can bring, if that is not high up enough for you, you can bring a chair underneath your seat. Otherwise, allow the hips to sit down onto that bolster. Lift up through the heart. Keep your feet rooted down. If the heels are lifted, that's a very general tendency, is to have the heels lifted. You can bring a blanket underneath them, or it's okay if they're lifted. Just keep them lifted. Take a big breath in, lift through the heart. Again, think of your knees opening out. So start to lean forward and bring your elbows to the inner knees. Think of your elbows pressing into your knees, helping your knees work in that direction. The spine is long from crown to tail, and the heart is lifted. So the thumbs can almost act as a little place for the sternum to rise into. Good. Root down through the feet. Start to engage into the legs. Press down to rise up. Floating the arms high. And bring your hands to your hips. Relax your shoulders. Relax your legs. Take a moment to just become aware of how your legs feel. From the tippy toes all the way up to the hips and the pelvis. We'll do this a few more times. As you inhale, float the arms high. So whether you're on a chair or your bolster, bend the elbows, bring your hands to the heart, and bend the knees. Think of the legs growing stronger. Knees are opening out towards the back of the room, sinking the hips all the way down in your squat. Feel the strength of your legs. And then find wherever you are settling your bum onto. In this case, we're still with the bolster as our prop. Lift up through the heart. Relax through the shoulders. Inhale, find length. As you exhale, bring the elbows to the inner knees. Help open it out. Root down through the feet. Engage the legs as you rise up with strength. And hands come to the hips on the exhale. Good. So taking a prop out of the way will allow us to get a little deeper. Inhale, float the arms high. As you exhale, hands to the heart. Inhale, lift through the heart, lift through the crown. Exhale, bend the knees. Sink the hips down. And find that block on the next setting. Elbows come into the inner knees, inner thighs. Maybe you play around with trying to walk your feet in a tiny bit more, or you can widen them to give a little more space to the hip area. Lift up through the heart. Keep a nice lengthened spine. Then as you exhale, root through the feet. Inhale, rise all the way up. We'll move progressively through each position, knowing that the first position might be your position. If you want to start there and see where your edge is today, it'll give you a nice opportunity to be with your breath for those 10 full breaths. So I'll just demonstrate into the next height of the block, bending into the knees, sinking all the way down. You'll be getting a little lower. Can you keep the length of the spine? In this position, you can also take a variation where you drop your hand. So we'll do our right hand comes down in front of the right toes. Inhale, open up the opposite arm towards the sky, opening up the heart. Doing your best to make sure that knee is not caving in, but we're opening, creating space in the upper body and in the lower body. We're building strength in the legs, finding mobility in the hips, and creating this grounding sense through the lower half of the body. And release that left hand down. Switch sides. Inhale, right arm reaches up. Now, if it's a struggle to get the whole hand down, fingertips work just as well. Reaching up through the top fingers, opening through the heart, rooting down through the fingers of the left hand, and continuing to let your right knee and your left knee draw away from the mat. And release that hand down. Root down, palms come to touch, rise up. Strong legs. You might have the availability to take all props out of the way, float the arms high, and sink into your full expression. Malasana. You can release your hands down, and we'll come out of this pose in a different way by pressing the hips up towards the sky. Toes shift to the front of the room, so feet are parallel. And taking a gentle fold, feeling the back body release and starting to awaken into the backs of the legs even more. A slow root down and rise up. And that was Malasana, or Garland pose. We'll bring it down to the ground now. So as you come down to the ground, have all of your props in reaching distance. Dandasana is known as staff pose. And staff pose is a very straightforward pose where the legs are extended out in front of you. The knees are pointing towards the ceiling, so they're not out to the sides or caving in towards each other, but the legs are long, knees are pointing up, and the toes start to draw towards your face as you press down through the tops of the legs. Dandasana, the legs are long. We're at about a 90-degree angle of the body. The crown of the head reaches up. The palms come down by your sides alongside the hips. You press into the palms to help lift up through the heart, broaden across the chest, and draw your shoulder blades in towards the spine. The chin is parallel with the earth, so it's not super lifted or it's not tucked unless you're taking a chin lock. So the chin is parallel with the earth. The body is engaged. You feel all of the muscles of your legs hugging to the bones. You feel the lift in the upper body, all of the muscles in the back body benefiting your posture. The core is integrated. You're breathing. Dandasana. To assist yourself in Dandasana, you can sit up on a blanket. The higher the fold of the blanket, the higher the lift that you'll have in your hips. If a blanket is not thick enough, you can also come onto a bolster. And as you come onto your bolster, the hips are nice and high, the legs are long. You have more freedom in the backs of your legs, in the hips to work with. Roll the shoulders up, back, and down. Press your hands into your prop or to the ground to help lift up through the heart, lengthening through the spine. Dandasana. If the backs of the legs are tight, you can bend into the knees, feeling the torso rise up. Reach to the crown, plant the hands alongside of you. Dandasana. So we'll take Dandasana right into our next pose, which will be Baddha Konasana. Baddha Konasana is bound angle pose. This can be practiced seated or lying down, where it would be Supta Baddha Konasana for reclined bound angle pose. If you have tight hips, stay here with the prop underneath you. Yeah, you might enjoy it, and then you can always take it away and see how that feels as you grow into the pose. We'll bring the soles of the feet in towards each other. Let the knees open out wide. Drawing the heels in towards the groin. And I'll give you the option for supporting yourself with this pose right away, because I see very often in class, people have a lot of tightness in their hips because their knees are lifted and they're having to use so much more effort rather than just letting the knees relax down, opening through the hips, through the inner groin, and feeling the beauty of the benefit of this pose. This pose is really beneficial to bring more awareness to your posture. If you haven't practiced this pose quite often, in the beginning, you can feel a lot of firing up in the back of the body and in the core because everything is working to help create this really beautiful posture. So the muscles are supporting the spine. And if you haven't used them in a while, like so, then they're going to be expressing that to you through that awareness. So if your knees are generally lifted, grab some blocks and bring the blocks to support underneath your knees. The blocks have multiple settings, so if you got to lift them up, create them to get a little higher. You just want to feel really supported. So if you are not holding onto the block, you are not worrying about the block falling. So get it right in the perfect nook and cranny or spot of your outer leg. And then you can let your hands rest on the tops of your shins. Feel this broadening across your chest and this length in the spine. Notice your belly and make sure you're having deep belly breaths. You're not holding on to your breath in this pose, but relax into it. As you take a few breaths, then you might begin to walk the blocks down a height and see if a little bit more has opened, a little bit more space has been created. Eventually, you might just take the blocks out of the way. The blocks are too intense, like too jarring, the areas that it gets your leg. Pillows. They're nice and soft. They bring a bit more of a restorative touch, and it allows your body to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system, right? Where we are in that rest and digest and that calm space versus feeling the sympathetic nervous system when we're panicked and we're not allowing this moment of rest because we're so focused on, the tightness in the body or where there's tension. And it takes time to get to that space. So give yourself the time. Pause this video if you want to pause this video and feel this pose for yourself, right? So any props that you're using or not using, maybe you take that blanket or that bolster out from underneath your seat. You find yourself in Baddha Konasana. And try your best to not round deeply in the pose and be unaware of the shoulders, but a bit more active. Welcome the breath into the legs. If your thumbs are near your feet, you can give yourself a little bonus foot massage. And press your thumbs into the inner arches, the heels, even the ankles, and just kind of give some extra love to your feet, especially if you've been on them all day. I waitress as well, so I come home at the end of the night, and after being on my feet for 6+ hours, sometimes these poses are really nice to just thank my legs and bring some awareness into taking care of stretching them and resting them, and just kind of being in that space with alivening your legs and awakening them. Good. So Baddha Konasana is one of my favorite poses. You can practice it on your back as well. You essentially do the same thing, just lying down. We're not going to get super into it, but I will just demonstrate that. The blocks can still come underneath, or even if you have 2 bolsters or the 2 pillows, that can come underneath. You can do a lot with this pose. You can choose different variations of the arms. One of my favorite self-assists is to take my palms and just kind of nestle it into that hip crease or even your knuckles. Just kind of massaging that out like we massage our feet in the upright position. This is a very self-caring way to practice this pose. And that is Baddha Konasana or Supta Baddha Konasana. We'll come into our final pose of Paschimottanasana. Paschimottanasana is translated to as intense Western stretch or a forward bending pose or forward fold, seated forward fold. I'm going to go into it right away with props. So if you had that blanket underneath your seat for the previous pose, your hips are a little more on the tighter side, or you just like that extra support, you can come onto your blanket. Just work your way towards the edge of it. So you have a slight tilt in the pelvis. And then lift up through the heart. Your strap can come around the bottoms of your feet, right under the toes. You can hold onto the strap. Now, make sure you're not like gripping on for dear life, but have like a feather light hold onto the strap. You want to puff up through the chest, relax the shoulders down the back body, engage the legs, draw the toes towards your face. Be really active here. So very similar to Dandasana. As you lift up, feel space being made in the torso. As you exhale, lead with the heart hinging from the hips into your fold. Now you might begin to walk your hands down the strap. Don't round in. That is a variation in some postures, But for a Paschimottanasana, we keep a flat back. So as you lean forward, you're doing your best to keep the flat back rather than rounding the shoulders. Keep the heart open, keep the chest broadening east and west, and keep the heart reaching towards the toes. Yeah. I kind of like to lean slightly side to side just to keep that lift on each side as you lean forward. And when you find your edge, breathe there. One of the biggest tendencies is to just like want to force yourself into the pose or pull yourself into the pose. But this pose teaches us a lot about patience. So just be with where you are today. Maybe your hands can come closer towards the feet. Maybe your hands can come to the feet, perhaps wrapping them around the outer edges. Thinking of the heart shining forward. Remember, we're not rounding in, but we're keeping a lengthened spine. Bringing a lot of awareness into the backs of the legs, feeling the torso compress into the thighs, finding that lift, that space between all of the ribs, growing nice and tall. Your hands can also come to the sides of the legs. Eventually walk closer towards the heels. Your peace fingers can come to your big toes. Yogi toe lock. Lift up, find length, and then find a little bit more of a fold. Right, so you work your way into it. For more of a restorative style, you would just bring a bolster or pillows or a block or two. I'll show you a few different options. Bring it on top of your legs, lift up through the heart, keep the feet flexed, then reach the heart towards the feet. To make this more of a restorative style, then allowing the chin to soften in towards the chest. And getting a stretch further up the spine. And then slowly coming up. If you have two bolsters, or if you have a bolster and pillows, if you are a super beginner and just want to slowly work into bringing awareness into the backs of the legs and the spine, come here. This is a extremely restorative style of this pose. You can let the toes relax. You can let the legs relax. You can allow the hands to stack and just soften the eyes, soften the chin. You can bring elbows to the top prop, whatever that prop is. Let your forehead rest in your palms. Yeah. Get creative with it. Maybe you want to support your forehead. So Paschimottanasana or intense Western stretch can be an intense pose, but it also can be the complete opposite of it. So depending on the kind of day that you had or depending on how your body is feeling, allow the pose to suit you and your needs. So it can be intentional and allow you to journey inward and feel more of that calm and that peacefulness, right? It's in that space where we allow that light to shine. So take what you need from these poses. Allow them to bring in the awareness of your legs, the opening of the hips, the strengthening of the thighs, of the calves, of the shins, of the ankles, right? Our whole lower half is doing something, whether it's stretching, strengthening, gaining flexibility, working on mobility. There's a lot going on. Take these poses and bring them into the bits and pieces that work best for you on your given day, whenever you're practicing this. Give yourself time in each pose to be with the breath. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comments below. If you have anything that you want to share with your experience with any of these poses, then drop that in the comments. Feel free to give this video a like and hit the subscribe button so you can continue to get videos on yoga, mindfulness, and meditation. I will see you on the mat next time. Namaste.